As we get closer and closer to the end of the year, and with more and more head coaches' seats getting hot and those that are being fired, a big question is now starting to surround the Detroit Lions and the fan base. What happens to Ben Johnson at the end of the year? We're going to talk about it in today's episode, folks, so stay tuned.
We used to be a team no one respected. We used to be a team no one feared. That was then. This is now.
First victory of the year on the line. Goff's got it. Back, looks, throws, end zone. Yes! Caught!
You know who we are.
10-5, end zone, touchdown Detroit Lions!
And you know where to find us. We won't be far. We'll be on your front porch waiting for you. We are the New Era Lions. And
we are driven by Detroit.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike, and we're diving in right now. As always, to those that are coming back to the show, I just want to say thank you all for coming back. Thank you all for your view, your support, your patronage. Thank you all for everything that you do. It absolutely means immense to me. And for those that are tuning into my show for the very first time, I just want to say thank you all for giving my show a shot. Thank you all for your view. Hopefully you guys enjoy the content, and hopefully I also gain your subscription. But to everybody, I just want to say God bless. Hope you all are having a good day, and let's dive into the show. So here's the thing, folks. We're getting closer and closer to the end of the year. Obviously, it's going to take a couple more weeks before we actually, get to the end of the season, playoffs, Super Bowl. The actual off season's a little bit of time away. But we have to understand something here, that once the regular season kind of is over, that's when for some teams, the teams that missed the playoffs, the teams that are one and done in the playoffs, teams that have already fired their head coaches, that's when the time to start building comes into play. That's the time for rebuilding. That's the time for start going out and getting new talent, new coaches, whatever the case might be. And that time in particular is a lot closer than what a lot of people are giving it credit for. So here's the thing. When we take a look at the Detroit Lions right now, we already have our head coach in Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell is a huge popular icon here in Detroit. He's definitely got a future. He's definitely going to become one of the most popular head coaches in Detroit Lions history. But then when we get to our coordinators, when it comes between the difference in talent and difference in popularity, difference in just about anything between our coordinators, it's night and day difference. You take a look at Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson is still one of the most popular coordinators. He's very much liked in Detroit. A lot of people like him as an offensive coordinator. They like him they like what he brings to the table for our offense. They like what he can do for us. Whereas with Aaron Glenn, it is a completely different story because most people really look at Aaron Glenn and they're just like, listen, there's nothing spectacular about this dude. The only reason he even has a job still for most people, in their opinion, is the fact that him and Dan Campbell are buddies because it's like, listen, we're just not seeing the same kind of production, the same kind of consistency, the same kind of anything from Aaron Glenn that we're seeing from Ben Johnson and their respective units. So when we take a look at Ben Johnson, we have to take a look at it this way because ever since Ben Johnson became the Detroit Lions offensive coordinator, he has ascended into stardom, not only here in Detroit, but has become one of the hottest head coaching candidates over the last year. And that was in last offseason where he got head coaching job interviews. And this offseason, he is definitely going to get more of those. So what we're going to talk about here is pretty much this, because every year a couple of coaches will get fired. It happens. I don't think there's been a single season where a head coach just does not get fired. It happens. There's going to be a head coach or two, maybe even a couple, that are going to get fired, which is going to make way for a coordinator somewhere to get their chance to provide, to be, like that head coach, to be that head man. And it's going to provide hope for an organization that is trying to, turn things around. They're looking towards the future. And this year, there happens to be, in my opinion, quite a handful of head coaching jobs that will be vacant. And when we take a look at the ones that are already vacant and the ones that are most likely going to be vacant by the end of the year, there's a lot of potential places where a coach like Ben Johnson could be highly sought after. But sitting where I am right now, I thought about it and I was like, okay, here. In my honest opinion, there are 6 places that are most likely going to be looking for new head coaches or are going to have a new head coach. The first 2 we already know about, which is the Raiders and the Panthers, because they've already fired Josh McDaniels from the Raiders and they just recently fired Frank Reich from the Panthers. But in my opinion, the other 4 teams are this: the Washington Commanders. They've already been reported, rumored, whatever, that they're going to fire Ron Rivera at the end of the year. So for me, that's an opening that's going to become vacant. The Chargers, the Los Angeles Chargers. At this point, Brandon Staley's job is on life support. It's like, listen, dude, I don't know how he lasted one more year in his job as the Los Angeles Chargers head coach, but for me, it's like, listen, I just don't know how a guy that is supposed to be a defensive-minded head coach is not able to win more games with one of the most hottest quarterbacks in the game as far as talent is concerned, as far as the ability to have just pure raw throwing talent, and he simply cannot win with him. So for me, Brandon Staley's also very much likely going to get fired at the end of the year. Then you take a look at a team like the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, I'm not saying that they're most likely going to fire, but I guarantee you this, Arthur Smith, the head coach of the Falcons, his seat is not particularly cool. It's like, listen, he's been the head coach out there for a while, and he kind of is doing the exact same thing that Jason Garrett used to do with the freaking Cowboys. It's like you're kind of getting these mid-tier seasons, like 7-8 wins, but you're never officially ever getting over the hump. Now, is that officially on him? No, he really can't do anything with Desmond Ridder as his quarterback, but it's like, listen, at some point, the Falcons are just going to be like, listen, we have to go in a different direction here because we're just not getting anywhere with him. So I think the Falcons are another team that also could potentially be looking for a new head coach at the end of the year. And the last one I'm going to throw in here is one of our division rivals. That's the Bears. I'm sorry. I know Bears fans that might watch this, they're going to not want to hear this, or some of them may want to hear it. But for me, it's like Matt Eberflus, his job's hanging on by a thread. Again, I know that it's not his fault. There's only so much he can do with the roster that was given to him, and that roster was purely crap when he got it. But it's like, listen, we know how the NFL is. It's like, listen, you only get so much time, and then you're possibly going to be getting your walking papers. And for me, two of these guys have already gotten their walking papers, but these other guys, Ron Rivera, Brandon Staley, Arthur Smith, Matt Eberflus, their time's coming. If not this year, probably next year. But for me, it's like, listen, these are 6 teams that could be looking for a new head coach. And for me, there's reasons why each one of them could potentially want to go after Ben Johnson because, like I said, Ben Johnson's one of the hottest names in the NFL right now. He has got a lot of traction. He has got a lot of, kind of like a lot of just everybody's kind of wanting to see what they can get for him. They want to see if they could potentially get him to be their new head coach. And I'm hoping and praying, because understand why I'm making this episode. I'm not saying I want Ben Johnson to leave. I'm just simply saying, we might have to accept a harsh reality here that maybe we don't get Ben Johnson back. Because the only real reason we got Ben Johnson back the last offseason was for 2 main reasons. 1, Jared Goff. 2, because Sheila decided to open the purse strings and decided to say, listen, we will pay you more money to come back and be our offensive coordinator. They gave him a raise. That's the only real reason, in my opinion, why he came back to be the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. And realistically, that might be the only reason he does come back. I don't know. But I do know that after looking at it a little bit, there are a couple of reasons, in my opinion, why he will continue to stay. Because I know this. There are a lot of Lions fans that are kind of right now running the emotional gauntlet, if you will, of wondering if whether or not Ben Johnson's going to stay or not. And again, the reasons why I think he could stay, again, is because of the fact that Jared Goff is here. We already know this very well. Him and Jared Goff have a very good relationship. They like working with each other. They have a good quarterback offensive coordinator relationship. So for me, I think that that's going to be a high influencing factor to keep him here. Then you have to think about it this way. Detroit was the very first team that gave him a shot to be an offensive coordinator. They were the team that officially gave him that opportunity to kind of step out and to be his own man a little bit. So for me, I think that there's a sense of, loyalty to the Detroit Lions. There's a sense of, okay, I want to stick this out. I actually want to continue to help this team. Then you have to think about it as well. Ben Johnson found success here in Detroit. I mean, before he was here in Detroit, there was a news article that literally showed every time he was with another team, he really didn't find a whole lot of success on offense. Detroit is the very first team that he has found any sort of success. Again, this is just me talking. I'm not Ben Johnson, but for me, it's like, listen, you found success. Don't rock the boat. Don't upset the balance. If you've got something good going, don't try and, reinvent the wheel here. But then the final thing I can think of is this, and I've heard several of my fans tell me this when we've talked about Ben Johnson. He's not ready yet. Ben Johnson has 1 year as an offensive coordinator, about to be 2 years as an offensive coordinator. That's not nearly enough experience to be a head coach. That's nowhere close to enough experience. Some of these head coaches that have been in the business for a while were coordinators, position coaches for years and years and years before they officially got their shot. Ben Johnson is still one of the youngest guys in the NFL. I know everybody's looking for the the next Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, whatever case you want to be, the next like whiz-bang freaking offensive-minded head coach. But it's like, listen, those guys are anomalies. You take a look at most of the head coaches in the NFL, they're not like super, super young. They're usually in their mid to late 40s, almost in their 50s. These new coaches that we're starting to get, they're starting to change they're starting to change the landscape a little bit. But it's like, listen, you take a look at guys like Bill Belichick, Mike Tomlin, Harbaugh. These are guys that have been doing this nonsense for years upon years. So for me, I don't think that Ben Johnson's going to want to leave just yet because maybe he doesn't feel he has the experience. However, though, for every reason that I can think of why he would stay, there's also reasons why I think he could go. Again, you have to think about it. Who does not love being in charge? Who does not love having the ability to make the shots and make the calls? So for me, being the head man somewhere, having the ability to make his own decisions, that definitely has some allure. Now, granted, with having all that ability to make those decisions comes all the responsibility. Everything comes tumbling on your head when something screws up. So for me, that's kind of a double-edged sword. But then you have to also think about it this way. Some of the biggest draws to becoming a head coach is the fact that you have the ability to establish a legacy. If you're really good as a head coach, you can actually kind of write yourself into the NFL history books as one of the best head coaches that has ever coached the game. Coaches like Bill Belichick, Bill Parcells, Don Shula, Tom Landry. These are all guys that I can think of that their names are forever going to be attached and associated with the NFL because of their ability to be head coaches. There's other guys that I can talk about too. I mean, for crying out loud, you can talk about, there's so many examples of head coaches that have been able to establish themselves in the NFL, history books as some of the best to ever coach. So for me, it's like, if you can get that ability, that's something that I think that's a really big draw for these guys because they want to say, hey, I could potentially be that. And then finally, you have to think about it this way. I just talked about how he's successful here in Detroit. Maybe Ben Johnson wants to go to another franchise and do the exact same thing for that franchise that he's done here in Detroit. So that's possibly another reason why he could go. And then the final reason he could go is this. Again, I know a lot of people are going to say Shield just needs to offer more money, but it's like, listen, if we're going to start getting into a matching contest between who's going to give out the more money, I don't know who's going to win it, but it's like, listen, the ability to have your own job, the way to call your own stuff and have money like a head coach, again, that's a really hard thing to say no to unless you really don't want it. So again, money could be another reason why Ben Johnson could go. I think that's probably the least likely reason because money doesn't seem to be a driving factor for him. But again, it's kind of like one of those things. If I won a lottery, I sure as thunder wouldn't turn it down. But it's not like I'm just a greedy person. That's kind of the way I look at it with Ben Johnson. Now, when you take a look at all those reasons that he could go, that he could stay, then you start taking a look at the most likely candidates to sign Ben Johnson, or rather, I should say, the most likely candidates that could put in an offer for him that would really want to go after him. And out of those 5 or 6 teams that I just mentioned there, for me, this is what it comes down to. I think the number 1 most likely candidate is the Panthers. The number 2 most likely candidate is the Chargers, then the Commanders, then the Bears, then the Raiders. Those are the most likely teams, in my opinion, that are most likely going to want to go after Ben Johnson. Because for me, I don't really think that any team is going to want to push as hard as the Panthers. Now, the only team I didn't put on there is the Falcons, because again, I'm not 100% certain on whether or not the Falcons are going to move off from Arthur Smith. Again, that one's kind of 50-50 for me. So since it's still kind of in that ballpark there, I'm going to keep that one off the list for now. But it is definitely a team to kind of keep in the back of our head as we kind of move forward throughout the remainder of the year. But let's take a look at the Panthers here really quickly. Why the Panthers, I think, would be a team that's going to really push after Ben Johnson. Here's the reason why. Here's the main reason why. Last year, they made a strong push for Ben Johnson. They really wanted him. But at the end, he decided to come back to the Lions, and so that's why they settled with Frank Reich. I guarantee you this, they're not going to want to settle this year. They're going to want to go after Ben Johnson because you have to think about it this way. Ben Johnson, you pair him up with that young, exciting prospect quarterback that they have in Bryce Young, plus on top of that, there are already coaches out there in Carolina that have ties to Ben Johnson in the former Detroit Lions organization, such as Todd Walsh, the defensive line coach. And I mean, up until the fact he just got fired, you just had Deuce Staley out there. So there are ties. There is some similarity and connections out there. Now, here's the reason why I don't think it'll happen. First and foremost, you have to understand this. The QB that we're talking about, Bryce Young, he's very limiting for an offense due to his sheer size and his inexperience. That's number one. Number two, the roster of the Panthers is just an absolute mess. That roster is going to need a lot of tender love and care, and I don't know if Ben Johnson's going to want to go through the process of trying to fix that. Then you have to take a look at the management. The owner has literally no patience. The GM is an absolute joke. And when you think about that, that is not ideal for a first-time head coach. A first-time head coach does not want to walk into a situation where it's like, I'm not really going to get a whole lot of patience trying to turn this thing around, especially when I consider the fact that they just fired a guy that they only had for freaking 10, 11 games. That right there tells me I'm not going to get a whole lot of time to turn this thing around. I don't really want to come here and potentially have my whole legacy shot to hell in a handbasket because I have an owner that has no patience. So I don't think the Panthers in that regard might be a reason why. But again, I'm being fair to every team here. Let's take a look at the Chargers. The Chargers, you have to take a look at it from Ben Johnson's. There's a tantalizing amount of offensive talent on that team. They have a really, really good quarterback in Justin Herbert. They have some good talent on that offense as well. They've got a great wide receiver. They've got Austin Eckler. There's a lot of offensive talent for the Chargers. But it's not just offense. They also have some good defensive pieces too, such as Bosa. So it's a team that actually has some stuff to work with, which would be a really good thing for a first-year head coach. It's like, okay, I've already got some pieces to work with here. It's not like I'm starting from the ground up. However, though, there's a problem as to why I don't think that the Chargers might work out for him. First and foremost, let's think about the current coach that the Chargers have right now, Brandon Staley. When the Chargers hired Brandon Staley, he was a first-time head coach because he was the hotshot defensive coordinator that came from, I believe it was the Rams or the 49ers. I can't remember which one it was. But for me, it's like maybe the Chargers, rather than going back to that inexperienced well just because he's a hotshot coordinator, they might want to find somebody that's a little bit more experienced as a head coach so that way they can turn things around. Because you have to think about it. The AFC West has been a decently competitive division. So for me, that could also be a bit of a problem for a first-time head coach. It's like, listen, you're going out to the AFC West. There's a lot of competition out there. The Broncos are starting to turn things around. The Chargers are still a decent team, and obviously there's still the Chiefs. So it's like, listen, I don't know if you want to go stepping into that pond just yet, my friend, but Ben Johnson might do it. I hope he doesn't, but if he does, that would be what he's walking into. So that's the Chargers. Then let's move off to the next one, the Commanders. The Commanders are definitely an interesting kind of franchise. They've got some interest. They've got some intriguing, interesting offensive pieces. I mean, you got Terry McLaurin. Sam Howell looks like he could be something at quarterback. The ownership that they have is new. They're going to be patient. They're going to want to try and find an ideal situation that works for them and also could be ideal for a first-time head coach because, listen, new ownership's going to be patient. They're going to want to make sure everything's going right. They're not going to be too hasty or jumpy on certain things. But you have to think about this. Maybe if the ownership is patient, that doesn't necessarily mean the fans are going to be patient. Because think about it. The Commanders are just coming off of the Dan Snyder era. They absolutely detest Dan Snyder. And likewise, because of all the dumb stuff that he did, they're going to want, and I'm referring to the fans, they're going to want immediate results. This is a team that has already sold pieces this year in terms of trading players away. So for me, it's like this is a team that even though it has some pieces, it's in a bit of a flux period. And again, this could cause issues for a first-time head coach. So for me, I don't know if Ben Johnson's going to want to walk into that or not. Then we move to the next one, which is the Bears. The Bears, in my opinion, they definitely have one thing going for them. They have a dynamic quarterback. They have a guy in Justin Fields who can run the ball. For an offensive coordinator, this is going to provide a whole lot of different things that you could do, like Ben Johnson could actually start scheming a little bit of stuff around. So for me, that could be a draw. But you have to think about it. Outside of that, the Bears really just don't have much to work with. I know they have DJ Moore. I know they have Cole Kmet. And I know they have a couple of other pieces. But that Bears team is still in a very rough shape. It's going to take a couple of years before it's even fully ready to compete yet. The fact that they're 4-7 this year or 4-6, whatever it is, that I attribute to the fact that they're just trying to save their coach's job. And I attribute the fact that they're developing a tougher mindset. But for me, it's like, listen, I just don't know if that's going to be enough to draw Ben Johnson in. Because I also think this. The Bears currently have a defensive-minded head coach. Maybe they want to switch over to an offensive one so that way they can finally exploit Justin Fields to the full potential. I don't know. But then you have to think about why Ben Johnson might not want to go to Chicago and play and coach for the Bears. There are division rivals. I know that that's a little bit different for players versus coaches, but it's like, listen, the Bears are dysfunctional at best. They're going to take time to figure things out, and I don't know if that's really going to do anything for Ben Johnson. Because you also have to think about this. There's going to be a lot of heavy expectations for whoever takes over as the head coach if they fire Eberflus. Because think about this. The Bears have an absolute crap ton of freaking draft picks. For whatever players they draft, especially in the first round, because they got 2 first-round draft picks this year and they're going to be really high, the expectations are going to be immense that they are able to take those picks and turn that program around fast. I don't know if a first-year head coach is going to want to handle all that pressure. And then there's the final team on this list, which is the Raiders. The Raiders, you have to think about it. They're a historic franchise. They have some really talented players on that team, such as Josh Jacobs. They also have Devontae Adams. There's a lot of talent. They've also got what's his name? The guy out of Eastern Michigan. His name, Max Crosby. Thank you. My brain was literally losing it for a minute. They've got some talented pieces again, and it's Vegas. Come on now, Vegas is a huge draw. I mean, you're in one of the most popular cities on earth. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do in Vegas. It's gonna be a great selling point, and you have to think about this as well. Tom Brady's a part owner for the Raiders now. Like, who wouldn't want to rub shoulders with Tom Brady and kind of pick his brain, especially an offensive-minded head coach? But here's why I don't think that Ben Johnson would be a fit for the Raiders. First and foremost, the Raiders have just fired 2 head coaches almost back-to-back, and that was regardless of the contracts they had. Think about it. They fired John Gruden. He had a massive contract. Davis said, I don't care. They just fired Josh McDaniels. He had a massive contract. He said, I don't care. So for me, it's like, okay, regardless of the contract, regardless of the situation, this ownership has no problem cutting ties with you. So I don't know if that's something I want to necessarily deal with. But then you have to think about this. The Raiders don't have a clear answer at quarterback. They really don't. They signed Jimmy Garoppolo hoping that would fix things. That clearly did not happen. So they don't have a clear answer at quarterback. Again, just like I was talking about with the Chargers are at least in a better position than the Raiders. The Raiders are probably the worst team in the AFC West right now. And for as far as I'm concerned, that's not going to be a huge draw or selling point because, like, listen, you're going to be pretty much at the bottom of the AFC West, and the AFC West still has Patrick Mahomes out there. I don't know if I want to exactly tie myself to a team that is not going to most likely ever figure it out as long as Mahomes is in that division. And then you have to think about this right now as well. Who's the interim head coach for the Raiders? Antonio Pierce. There's been a lot of reports that have come out of the Raiders that those players, they love Antonio Pierce. They've said the same things about him that the Lions players have said about Dan Campbell. I'd run through a wall for him. He's a great coach. That to me might sound like, hey, maybe the Raiders might want to give Pierce the head coaching gig at the end of the year. Pardon me, I'm tripping over my tongue. Rather than going outside of the organization for someone like Ben Johnson. That's just my personal thought and opinion. So here's my assessment when I take a look at all this stuff. The most serious threats that are going to come after Ben Johnson are probably the Panthers and the Chargers. But I still feel that as long as Jared Goff is here and the Lions continue to show loyalty to Ben Johnson, they continue to be a successful program, and they have desire for him, I believe that he's going to stay. Now, I'm not saying that as a guarantee. I'm saying it as a most likely. I'm saying it as a probability. But again, things can change in an instant in the NFL. I hope Ben Johnson comes back. It's going to really help us out if we can get him for another year after this one. But we're going to have to see what happens. But I guarantee you this right now, like the title shows and like the thumbnail image shows, this is a time where a lot of Lions fans, they're starting to wonder, they're starting to worry because it's like, listen, if we lose Ben Johnson, what the thunder does that do to our offense? What does that do to our ability to continue to be a winning program? If he leaves, that's going to leave more questions than answers. And that's a time that a lot of Lions fans do not want to go back to where it's like, listen, we don't have anything that's of concrete, like sound, like, certainty. Now we're back into this kind of state of, well, we don't know what's going to happen. So for us, it's like us Lions fans want Ben Johnson to stay. I personally don't care if, Aaron Glenn goes, but I want Johnson to stay. That's just my personal thoughts and opinions. But anyway, I figured I'd put this together. I'm going to see if I can try to put out another video later today. We'll see if I can do that or not, but if not, I have tried my best. But I want to say right now, thank you all for watching yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you liked what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage you all to watch the next episode that I've got coming at the end of this one. I also encourage you all, please, to do one of these 3 things. Like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If by chance you subscribed in the past and you forgot to do so at the time, or you just subscribed and you not had a chance to do so, first and foremost, I want to highly encourage all please to subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out, and I appreciate every subscription that I get. We just passed 3,000 subscribers. Let's keep it going. And with that, I also want to say this. While I like the subscriptions, let's make sure we also turn on that bell notification icon as well, because again, subscription numbers are always going up, but we want to make sure you turn on that notification icon so that way as soon as I push something out, you never miss what I got coming out. It's always going to be good to have that on so that way you guys always are in the know-how of what I got coming out. I also encourage all please to share this content with your Lions friends and family members. Share it here on YouTube, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share it anywhere and everywhere you can with everybody and anybody that you can. And I also just want to say this. Thank you all again for tuning into my show. Thank you all for your view and your support and your patronage. If I hadn't earned your subscription and I just did, welcome to the family. I'm glad to have you. And if I still haven't earned your subscription, hopefully you'll come back and I'll get another shot to do so. But until that time, I just want to say to everybody, God bless. Thank you all for tuning into the show. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.